In the burning sands of the east, Rome met its darkest hour. At Carrhae, the proud legions shattered, their banners torn, their sacred eagles falling into foreign hands. 20,000 Romans lay dead, 10,000 more marched in chains to a distant land. Yet from this ruin rose a tale not of defeat, but of defiance. For in the clash between Rome and Parthia, shadows concealed more than loss. They concealed the seeds of Rome's rebirth. Stay with us as we journey into one of Rome's most haunting defeats and its unexpected redemption. From the blood-soaked sands of Carrhae to Augustus's triumph without war, this is a story of pride lost, honor reclaimed, and destiny reborn. Don't miss what comes next. The year was 53 BC, and the Roman Republic stood at the height of its ambition. Its legions had marched across Gaul, its eagles gleamed in Spain, its banners whipped in the winds of the Mediterranean. Yet for all its glory, the Republic was restless. One man hungered for recognition above all others. Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Rome, triumvir alongside Caesar and Pompey, and determined to carve his name into eternity by conquering the mysterious East. The Parthian Empire, seated in the vast plains of Mesopotamia, was no minor foe. Their lands stretched from the Euphrates to the mountains of Persia, their cavalry unmatched, their reputation formidable. But Crassus, blinded by greed and pride, dismissed them as little more than nomadic horsemen. He imagined another Alexander's conquest, a swift campaign that would pour unimaginable wealth into his coffers and elevate his status beyond Pompey and Caesar. With over 40,000 Roman soldiers at his back, he crossed the Euphrates, believing himself invincible. The omens, however, spoke differently. As the legions marched, dark prophecies echoed through Rome. Priests warned of ill fortune, sacred chickens refused to eat, and in one chilling tale, Crassus himself dropped a golden coin during a sacrifice, an omen of wealth lost. But he ignored them all. His men followed him reluctantly, their loyalty bound more to Rome than to the aging general whose vanity had led them far from home. At Carrhae, in the barren plains near the desert, the Roman army met its fate. From the horizon, the Parthians appeared, not as scattered bands of horsemen, but as a disciplined host of armored cavalry, their hooves pounding like thunder, their bows strung with deadly silence. At their head rode Serena, the Parthian commander, a man of cunning and ruthless precision. The Romans formed their traditional squares, shields locked, ready to absorb the charge. But the Parthians did not charge headlong. Instead, wave after wave of mounted archers unleashed a storm of arrows, their deadly shafts raining down on the legions. The desert wind carried with it the hiss of countless arrows, each one finding flesh, each one sapping Roman morale. Hours turned to days, and the Romans bled beneath the sun. The heavy infantry, the pride of Rome, could not reach their tormentors. Every advance dissolved into confusion as the horsemen melted away, only to circle back and strike again. Thirst clawed at the soldiers' throats, the desert heat baking their armor until it burned against their skin. The famous Roman discipline faltered under the endless storm. Then came the cataphracts, the Parthian heavy cavalry, charging with lances like spears of iron. Their impact shattered Roman lines, leaving bodies broken in the sand. Crassus, desperate and overwhelmed, faltered. His officers urged retreat, but every step backward only fed the slaughter. His son Publius, young and brave, led a desperate counterattack with the cavalry, but was surrounded, cut down, and his severed head paraded before his father's eyes. The sight broke the Roman spirit. What had been an army of conquest became a mob of survivors. By night, Crassus sought negotiation, but treachery awaited him. Lured into parley, he was seized and killed, his body mocked, his name cursed as a fool who had led Rome into ruin. The aftermath was catastrophic. 20,000 Romans lay dead upon the sand, their corpses picked by carrion birds. 10,000 more were captured, marched eastward into slavery, their fates forever lost in the shadows of Parthia. Worst of all, the sacred Roman eagles, symbols of legionary honor, of Rome itself, were seized by the enemy, a humiliation deeper than death. News of Carrhae struck Rome like a thunderbolt. Never before had the Republic suffered such a shame against an Eastern foe. The city that once prided itself on invincibility now reeled under disgrace. Families mourned fathers and sons who would never return. The Senate whispered of omens fulfilled, of gods abandoning Rome. And in the taverns and marketplaces, ordinary citizens spoke a chilling question. Had the Republic's destiny come to an end? Carrhae was not merely a defeat. It was a wound carved into the Roman soul, a reminder that glory could vanish in an instant, that even the mightiest legions could be broken. For in the deserts of the East, Rome had discovered its greatest nightmare, not only the arrows of Parthia, but the shadow of its own arrogance. The dust of Carrhae had not yet settled when the remnants of Rome's shattered army staggered westward. Their banners were gone, their commander dead, their comrades lost to the sands. Yet amidst this ruin, one young officer refused to let despair consume him. His name was Lucius Domitius, a man of little renown before that fateful campaign, but destined to become a symbol of survival in Rome's darkest hour. Domitius was no consul, no general of prestige. He was a tribune, scarcely 30, his family of modest standing. But as chaos engulfed the battlefield, when men dropped shields and fled blindly into the desert, he stood firm. Rallying a small band of legionaries, he carved a path through the encirclement, his sword gleaming beneath the pitiless sun. With every command, every decision, he breathed order into disorder, courage into fear. "Follow me," he cried, his voice hoarse yet unyielding. "Not for Crassus, not for the Senate, for Rome." Hundreds answered, clinging to the spark of leadership in his tone. Through parched throats and bleeding feet, he led them across hostile ground, harried by Parthian scouts, hounded by thirst. Yet Domitius refused surrender. Night after night, he devised routes through hidden ravines, masking their tracks, striking swiftly at small enemy patrols to seize water and supplies. By wit and iron resolve, he brought a remnant home. When those survivors staggered into Roman lines, filthy, broken, but alive, whispers spread. A new name, once obscure, now echoed across camps and forums. Lucius Domitius, an officer who had defied annihilation. In a moment when Crassus had failed, Domitius had endured. Though he did not recover Rome's honor, he embodied its resilience. Years passed, and Domitius's tale became part of the Republic's troubled memory. Yet his survival would prove more than an isolated act of heroism. For in the ashes of Carrhae, Rome required not just soldiers, but visionaries. Men who could imagine a path beyond vengeance, who could rebuild pride without plunging the Republic into further ruin. And fate had already prepared another figure for that role. Gaius Octavius, the man history would know as Augustus. When Caesar was murdered and Rome descended into civil war, the Republic seemed doomed to consume itself. Legions fought legions, brother turned against brother, the Mediterranean echoing with the clash of civil strife. Yet Octavian, young and underestimated, emerged from the blood and chaos. Patient, calculating, and relentless, he transformed from Caesar's heir into Rome's master. Among his closest allies stood Marcus Agrippa, a man of unmatched brilliance in war. Where Domitius embodied survival, Agrippa embodied strategy. He crushed Antony and Cleopatra at Actium, secured Rome's dominance over the Mediterranean, and forged the military backbone of Augustus's reign. Together, Augustus and Agrippa looked east, not with reckless ambition, but with the weight of memory. The shadow of Carrhae still loomed large. The lost eagles remained in Parthian hands, a daily reminder of Rome's humiliation. Augustus knew that no empire could claim eternal glory while such symbols of defeat remained unreclaimed. Yet unlike Crassus, he understood the East could not be conquered by brute force alone. The Parthians were not a foe to be swept aside. They were a rival to be outmaneuvered. So Augustus turned to strategy that Rome had seldom embraced: diplomacy. He sent emissaries, wove alliances, balanced threats with promises. He cultivated fear of Roman might while offering rewards for cooperation. To Parthia's rulers, Augustus presented himself not as a reckless invader, but as a sovereign who could grant stability or unleash chaos. His policy was not glorious in the old sense of legions clashing on the field, but it was glorious in its results. Domitius, now a seasoned commander and respected senator, lent his voice to this effort. He reminded Rome's leaders that vengeance alone would only reap more Carrhaes. He spoke of the desert sun, the endless arrows, the futility of meeting Parthia on its own terms. Instead, he urged patience, endurance, and cunning. His testimony carried weight, for he had seen what arrogance had cost and what survival had saved. Gradually, Rome's focus shifted. The days of rash conquests gave way to measured control. Provinces were secured, frontiers strengthened, and instead of bleeding men in Mesopotamia, Augustus invested in binding the empire together: roads, cities, laws, and the Pax Romana. Still, the unresolved wound of Carrhae festered. The eagles must be returned. And so, in the year 20 BC, after decades of subtle maneuvering, Augustus achieved what Crassus could not. Without drawing a sword, he compelled Parthia to restore the captured standards of Carrhae. When the sacred eagles returned to Rome, carried in solemn procession through the city, the people erupted in joy. Statues were raised, monuments inscribed, and Augustus's forum bore witness to a victory of the mind, not the sword. But the seeds of that triumph had been sown long before, on the burning plains of Carrhae, when a young officer refused to surrender. Lucius Domitius's defiance had proved that Rome could survive its darkest night. Augustus's diplomacy proved that Rome could transform survival into resurgence. Together, they forged a lesson for all time: that empires fall not when they are defeated, but when they cease to endure. Rome had found in Domitius the spirit of resilience, and in Augustus the vision of renewal. From the ashes of one disaster rose the dawn of an empire reborn. When the ashes of Carrhae reached Rome, they did not fall quietly. They descended like a storm upon the Republic, a city already racked by tension and suspicion. Word spread of 20,000 dead, 10,000 enslaved, and Crassus himself humiliated and killed. But it was not merely the loss of men that staggered Rome. It was the loss of dignity. The great Republic, mistress of the Mediterranean, had been humbled by an enemy many senators had dismissed as a distant nuisance. The people reacted first with disbelief. Markets froze as whispers filled the streets. Could it be true that the legions, the invincible shield of Rome, had been broken by Eastern horsemen? Mothers wept for sons who would never return. Fathers tore their garments in shame. The sacred eagles, believed to embody the very soul of Rome, were now trophies in Parthian hands. This was no ordinary defeat. It was an open wound in the Roman psyche, a humiliation written into the heart of the Republic. For the Senate, Carrhae was not just tragedy, it was political earthquake. Crassus's death shattered the delicate balance of the first triumvirate. Caesar and Pompey, once held in check by Crassus's presence, now stood unopposed, rivals poised to tear the Republic apart. The disaster in the East became fuel for factions in Rome, each blaming the other for weakness, arrogance, or betrayal. Some declared that the gods had abandoned the Republic. Others whispered that Rome's destiny was broken. Civil unrest brewed. Grain shortages and rising taxes, compounded by fear of invasion, ignited fury among the plebeians. Temples filled with anxious citizens offering sacrifices, desperate for signs that Jupiter and Mars had not turned their backs. Superstitions flourished. Some claimed to see omens in the skies. Others swore the Tiber itself ran red with blood. In every rumor, Carrhae lingered as a ghost. And beyond the Tiber, enemies stirred. To the north, Gaul simmered under Caesar's control, but unrest never fully slept. To the west, Spain demanded constant vigilance. To the east, the Parthians, emboldened by their triumph, pushed their influence further into Syria and Judea. The Republic was not merely humiliated, it was exposed. Its weaknesses, once hidden by conquest, now lay bare for all to see. In this moment of fragility, voices in the Senate called for vengeance. "Raise new legions," they demanded. "Strike back at once. Wash away this shame in Parthian blood." But the treasury bled from years of war, and the legions themselves were weary, stretched across provinces that burned with unrest. To march eastward again would be madness. Yet to do nothing was intolerable. Rome stood paralyzed, torn between pride and pragmatism. Among the people, the name of Crassus became a curse. Once admired for his wealth, Now he was mocked as the man whose greed had doomed legions. Satirists in the Forum whispered of his folly, claiming he had traded Roman lives for shadows of gold. His fate, betrayed and slain by his enemies, was retold as a warning of hubris, of ambition untempered by wisdom. But it was not only Crassus who bore the weight of guilt. Many questioned the very foundation of Rome's politics. Had endless ambition, the hunger of generals for glory, driven the Republic into ruin? Had the Senate lost its virtue, its unity, its sacred duty to guard the Republic? The defeat at Carrhae was more than military. It was moral. It forced Rome to confront a truth it despised, that the Republic was fractured, vulnerable, and perhaps mortal. The tremors spread outward. In the provinces, governors doubted Rome's invincibility. Subject peoples who once submitted in awe now murmured that the empire could be resisted. Allies, once cowed by Rome's prestige, weighed their loyalties anew. The aura of inevitability, the belief that Rome's legions could not be broken, was shattered. Even within the legions themselves, morale faltered. Veterans who had fought in Gaul and Spain looked eastward with dread. Tales of Parthian horse archers, phantoms who struck from afar, who could kill without ever closing in, haunted campfires. To fight Parthia was no longer seen as glorious, but as near suicidal. Rome's might, once unquestioned, now faced a fear it could not conquer with steel: doubt. And yet from this crisis, the seeds of transformation began to stir. For the Republic, trembling as it was, did not collapse under the weight of Carrhae. Instead, it was forced to reckon with its own flaws. The defeat exposed arrogance, but it also demanded resilience. The people demanded leaders who could restore honor, who could mend the fracture between pride and survival. Out of this crucible would rise figures who reshaped Rome's destiny. Caesar, Pompey, and their heirs would plunge the Republic into civil war. Yes, but from that chaos, a new order would emerge. The humiliation of Carrhae became both a curse and a catalyst, a curse that lingered in every senator's speech, every soldier's memory, every monument built to cover the shame, a catalyst that demanded the Republic evolve or perish. For though the Republic trembled, it did not yet fall, and in its trembling, it prepared to be reborn as something greater than any had imagined. An empire forged not only by conquest, but by endurance, vision, and the will to rise after ruin. To understand the terror that Carrhae unleashed upon Rome, one must grasp the power of the enemy they faced. For the Parthians were no mere scattered horsemen, no barbarian tribes clashing at Rome's frontiers. They were heirs to the Persian legacy, masters of the vast eastern plains, and wielders of a weapon that Rome could neither match nor easily withstand: the horse archer. The Parthian style of war was unlike anything the legions had faced in Gaul, Spain, or even against Hannibal of Carthage. Their warriors rode swift, tireless horses, trained from childhood to shoot with deadly accuracy while at full gallop. They carried composite bows of horn and sinew, small enough to wield on horseback, yet powerful enough to pierce armor at distance. From these bows rained an endless storm of arrows, a living tempest that bled an enemy long before swords could meet. But their genius lay not merely in their weapons, but in their strategy. The Parthians fought with patience and deception, refusing to be drawn into the set-piece battles Rome excelled at. At Carrhae, they revealed their most feared tactic: the Parthian shot. As their cavalry feigned retreat, they twisted in their saddles, releasing volleys of arrows while riding away, killing pursuers without breaking stride. Against such fluid warfare, Rome's heavy infantry, disciplined but slow, was rendered powerless. At their core stood the cataphracts, armored cavalry encased in scale and iron, both rider and horse clad in steel. With lances as long as spears of the gods, they struck like a hammer once their foes had been softened by arrows. Few forces in the ancient world could withstand the charge of cataphracts. At Carrhae, they shattered Roman lines as if striking clay. Yet Parthia's strength was not only military. Their empire stretched across the great caravan routes of the Silk Road, drawing wealth from trade between Rome, India, and China. Their kings ruled from Ctesiphon, a city of splendor on the Tigris, where Persian grandeur merged with nomadic might. Unlike Rome, with its standing legions, Parthia fought through mobility. They could vanish into the deserts, melt into the plains, reappear when least expected. To invade them was to march into a mirage, to chase shadows beneath a blazing sun. This was the nightmare that haunted Rome after Carrhae. The legions, built to crush enemies with discipline and cohesion, were ill-suited to fight an opponent who refused to stand and be crushed. Against Gauls, Rome built fortresses. Against Carthage, it fought naval wars. But against Parthia, there was no wall to climb, no city to besiege, no fleet to burn. Only the endless plains where horsemen appeared and vanished like ghosts. The psychological weight of Parthia was immense. Soldiers whispered that Parthians were favored by the gods of the East, that their horses never tired, that their arrows never missed. In taverns and bathhouses, Romans spoke of Carrhae not as a battle lost, but as an encounter with a foe beyond mortal grasp. The humiliation of the lost eagles magnified this fear, for those golden standards were more than metal. They were Rome's soul, chained in foreign hands. And yet the Parthians were not invincible. Their empire, though vast, was fragile in its own way. Its kings struggled against ambitious nobles, its authority limited by distance and by the independence of powerful satraps. It lacked the iron discipline of Rome, the machinery of conquest that had built an empire from Britain to Africa. But in the open field under the blazing sun, no force could rival them. The clash between Rome and Parthia was not merely a contest of armies. It was a clash of worlds. Rome was a beast of cities, walls, and legions, its strength in discipline and structure. Parthia was a realm of horsemen and horizons, its strength in freedom of movement, speed, and the bow. Each represented a different vision of power, each tested the other's limits. For Rome, to face Parthia was to fight its own weakness. The Republic, built on infantry, order, and conquest, now faced an enemy who embodied chaos, mobility, and evasion. Rome's arrogance had blinded it to this difference. Crassus had believed gold and glory would be seized as easily in Mesopotamia as in Gaul. Instead, he had stumbled into a theater of war where Rome's might was shackled, its virtues turned into flaws. And so the Parthians became not merely adversaries, but specters haunting Roman thought. Every time Rome looked eastward, Carrhae's ghost whispered, "Remember." Every senator who spoke of war with Parthia faced not only political opposition, but the shadow of Serena's victory. Rome could conquer kingdoms, but against Parthia, it confronted something deeper, a reminder that it was not invincible, that even empires could bleed. The memory of Parthia lingered long beyond Carrhae. Generals who dreamed of Eastern conquest invoked it, some to inspire vengeance, others to warn against folly. It became a measure of ambition, a crucible of pride. To defeat Parthia would mean surpassing Alexander, avenging Crassus, reclaiming the eagles. To fall to Parthia again would mean repeating the Republic's most bitter shame. Thus, Parthia stood as Rome's great counterweight, a rival that tempered its pride, tested its resolve, and reminded it that empire was never absolute. The deserts of the East had given Rome its harshest lesson, that glory is fleeting, and that every empire, no matter how mighty, casts a shadow. The wound of Carrhae did not heal quickly. For decades, Rome bore its scar, a reminder etched into every formed debate and every soldier's memory. Yet the Republic did not collapse in the wake of that tragedy. Instead, it convulsed, tore itself apart in civil war, and from the chaos arose a single figure destined to reshape its fate, Gaius Octavius, known to history as Augustus. He was no towering general at first, no seasoned warrior forged by years of campaigns. He was a youth of frail health, scarcely 20 when Julius Caesar's assassination left the Republic in turmoil. Many underestimated him, dismissing him as a boy clinging to the shadow of his adoptive father. But Octavian, as he was then called, possessed something Rome desperately needed: patience, calculation, and an iron will concealed beneath a mask of modesty. As Caesar's assassins fled, as Mark Antony struggled for dominance, Octavian maneuvered. He allied, betrayed, reconciled, and betrayed again. Each move measured, each alliance forged not out of loyalty, but necessity. He endured setbacks, yet with every defeat he learned. With every battle, his vision sharpened. Unlike Crassus, whose arrogance blinded him, Octavian understood that true power lay not only in the sword, but in endurance, cunning, and timing. At his side stood Marcus Agrippa, his childhood friend, the general Rome did not know it needed. Where Octavian was calculating, Agrippa was decisive. He built fleets from nothing, won impossible battles, and crushed Antony and Cleopatra at Actium. Together, they forged a partnership that gave Octavian the military backbone and strategic genius to stabilize Rome. But once the civil wars ended, once Antony was gone and Octavian became Augustus, Rome still faced the shadow of Carrhae. The lost eagles remained in Parthian hands, symbols of humiliation that undermined Augustus's claim to have restored Rome. He could not call himself the bringer of peace, the restorer of glory, while the most sacred standards of the Republic remained chained in foreign soil. And so Augustus turned to the east. Yet unlike Crassus, he did not march blindly into Mesopotamia. He understood the lessons of history. Rome could crush kingdoms with brute force, yes, but Parthia was no ordinary kingdom. To attempt conquest would bleed legions, sap treasuries, and perhaps repeat Carrhae. Instead, Augustus wielded a weapon Rome had too often neglected, diplomacy sharpened by power. He sent envoys draped in Roman prestige, not begging but commanding. He cultivated Parthia's rivalries, exploiting divisions within their royal house. He balanced threat and promise, reminding Parthia that Rome's legions stood ever ready, while offering stability if peace prevailed. His diplomacy was not weakness. It was war by other means, a campaign fought with words instead of swords, gold instead of blood. This approach baffled some Romans. Veterans longed for vengeance. Senators clamored for an eastern campaign that would rival Alexander's conquest. But Augustus held firm. He reminded them that Rome's strength lay not only in expansion, but in consolidation. He secured frontiers, strengthened provinces, and wove together a vast empire that stretched from Gaul to Egypt. Every road, every law, every colony proclaimed Rome's endurance. Only then, with the empire secure, did he press Parthia. And Parthia, for all its power, was not unshakable. Its kings faced noble rebellions, its authority fractured by internal strife. Rome's steady pressure, coupled with Augustus's diplomacy, pushed them toward negotiation. And then at last the moment came. In 20 BC, nearly 3 decades after Carrhae, Augustus achieved the unthinkable. Without battle, without massacre, Parthia returned the captured standards of Crassus's legions. The eagles that had fallen in the desert, the symbols of Rome's darkest humiliation, now returned home in solemn procession. It was not a victory carved in blood, but it was a triumph no less glorious. When the news reached Rome, the city erupted. Citizens flooded the streets, temples filled with sacrifice, poets sang of destiny restored. On the Forum of Augustus, a monument was raised to honor the return of the standards. Marble gleamed with inscriptions proclaiming peace, triumph, and the wisdom of their leader. Rome, once bowed in shame, now stood tall again. Yet this was more than a restoration of symbols. It was proof that Rome had learned. Where Crassus had rushed to conquest, Augustus had chosen patience. Where arrogance had once led to ruin, strategy led to renewal. Augustus showed that empire was not built on reckless ambition, but on endurance, discipline, and vision. Even Lucius Domitius, the once obscure officer who had led survivors from Carrhae, now an elder statesman, lived to see the day. He stood among the crowd as the eagles were carried through the streets, tears carving lines on a weathered face. To him, it was not merely the return of metal and gold. It was the redemption of every comrade who had fallen, every sacrifice that had bled into the sands of the East. The people saw Augustus as more than a ruler. He was a healer of Rome's wounds, the man who turned defeat into triumph, who proved that the gods had not abandoned their city. Statues of Augustus rose across the provinces, his image cast as the restorer of peace, the bringer of renewal. Yet Augustus himself understood the deeper truth. Victory was never permanent, peace was fragile, The shadow of Parthia would remain, the threat of new wars ever looming. But in reclaiming the eagles, he had reclaimed something greater, Rome's belief in itself, and belief, he knew, was the foundation upon which empires endured. Thus, from the sands of Carrhae to the marble of Rome, the journey came full circle. Rome had been humiliated, humbled, brought to its knees. But under Augustus, it rose again, not through conquest, but through wisdom. In that rise, the world witnessed not only the survival of a republic turned empire, but the rebirth of destiny itself. The standards had returned. For the people of Rome, their arrival was more than ceremony. It was resurrection. In the clang of trumpets, in the shimmer of eagles once lost, the republic's darkest wound was closed. Yet what followed was no quiet peace, but a transformation so profound that it altered the fate of the Western world. The Rome that rose after Carrhae was no longer the same fragile republic that had sent Crassus eastward. It was something greater, harder, forged in the furnace of defeat and rebirth. Augustus's reign brought a new age, the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome, that stretched for centuries. It was not an absence of war, for legions still marched, frontiers still burned, but it was a peace of order, stability, and vision. From the ashes of humiliation came a Rome that learned discipline. Carrhae had revealed the perils of arrogance, the folly of chasing glory without preparation. Augustus's triumph showed the power of patience, the art of turning weakness into strength. Rome emerged not simply restored, but transformed, more cautious in ambition, more deliberate in conquest, more certain in its destiny. The eagles reclaimed were placed in the temple of Mars Ultor, Mars the Avenger. There they stood, glimmering in sacred light, a permanent reminder that no defeat was final, no humiliation eternal. Citizens gazed upon them as proof that Rome could fall, yes, but Rome would always rise again. Across the empire, poets and sculptors immortalized this rebirth. Virgil's verses spoke of Rome's eternal destiny. Ovid celebrated Augustus's order. Horace sang of discipline restored. Marble and bronze carried the message that through Augustus, through renewal, Rome had achieved something more lasting than victory. It had achieved survival. Yet even as Augustus stood at the pinnacle, the lessons of Carrhae remained sharp in memory. Rome never truly conquered Parthia. Instead, it maintained a delicate balance of threat and diplomacy. That balance shaped centuries of policy, reminding emperors that not every enemy could be crushed, not every war won by steel. The East demanded respect, patience, and vigilance. The climax of this tale, then, is not a single battle. It is the vision of a civilization that refused to be defined by defeat. Crassus's arrogance had nearly broken Rome, but Augustus's wisdom remade it. The contrast was stark. One man chasing shadows of Alexander, another forging the reality of empire. One died nameless in the desert, the other built the foundation of Rome's golden age. Lucius Domitius, old and frail, witnessed the culmination of this journey. In his twilight years, he would tell younger generations of the day he staggered from the sands of Carrhae, carrying the last fragments of a broken legion. And then he would point toward the temple of Mars Ultor, to the eagles gleaming in holy silence. "We bled for this," he would whisper. "We lost everything so Rome could learn. And Rome endures." The endurance became legend. The Romans would face new disasters, Teutoburg Forest, Gothic invasions, civil wars that would tear emperors apart. Yet each time they remembered. They remembered that no defeat was final, no shame eternal. For as long as the people believed in their destiny, Rome would rise again. In this way, Carrhae was not the end of Rome, but its crucible. Out of tragedy came resilience. Out of humiliation, rebirth. And in Augustus's triumph, the empire found not only vengeance, but renewal. The resurrection of Rome was not a single moment, but a promise that its destiny stretched beyond the deserts, beyond its wounds, beyond the reach of time. So when the sun set on Augustus's reign and the empire looked toward new horizons, the memory of Carrhae no longer haunted them. Instead, it guided them, For Rome had learned that its greatest strength was not invincibility, but the power to rise again from the ashes. And thus the story closes as all great epics do. Not with finality, but with continuity. The legions would march, the emperors would rule, the empire would face storms yet unimagined. But within the heart of Rome, forged in fire and tragedy, lived an unshakable truth. Rome may stumble, Rome may bleed, Rome may fall, but Rome always rises.